Zola stepped into her grandmother Mama Ifeoma's birthday party, holding Tay's small hand tightly. The house was sparkling, crystal chandeliers, golden decorations, and guests dressed in their finest clothes. Influential family members and friends filled every corner, laughing and chatting, the kind of party that made everyone feel they were part of something important. Zola tried to smile, hoping Tay wouldn't notice how nervous she felt, but that hope vanished the moment her niece Amara leaned close and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. "Grandma says you're the servant's kid." Time seemed to freeze. Zola's heart pounded, and she could feel every eye on them. Some guests giggled awkwardly, while others murmured behind their hands. Tay's small face pressed against her side, confused and scared, not understanding why anyone would say something so cruel. Zola felt a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. She realized this wasn't just a careless joke, it was a reflection of the bias that had always shadowed their family, a cruel line drawn between children of privilege and those who weren't. Without a word, she tightened her grip on Tay's hand. Looking down at him, she whispered softly, "Don't listen to them. You are stronger than their words." In that instant, Zola made a silent promise to protect her son's heart, to shield him from the sting of family prejudice, and to show him that dignity and worth come from within, not from anyone's approval. Even in that glittering room, full of judgment and whispers, Zola's resolve became crystal clear. Zola sat in the corner of the glittering party, her mind drifting back to years that felt like a different lifetime. She remembered waking up before dawn, tying Tay's shoelaces, and rushing him to school in Lekki before heading to her first job. By evening, she was at her second job, exhausted but determined to make sure there was enough for rent, food, and Tay's school fees. Nights were the hardest, quiet hours when she sat alone, tallying bills, planning the next day, and dreaming of a life where her son could feel safe and proud. Her husband's death had left a hole in their lives, but she refused to let grief stop her. She poured every ounce of energy into raising Tay, protecting him, and giving him a chance at the future he deserved. Meanwhile, she thought of her brother Chinidu and her niece Amara. They always seemed to have life on easy mode. Mama Ifeoma never missed a chance to show favoritism. New gadgets, expensive gifts, words of praise that were rarely, if ever, offered to Tay. Zola remembered family gatherings where she tried to speak up, offering ideas or sharing stories about her son's achievements, only to be brushed off or ignored. The hurt cut deeper than any insult because it came from the people who were supposed to support her. She remembered Amara repeating little jabs, sometimes subtly, sometimes in front of everyone, and how Mama Ifeoma laughed at them like they were harmless jokes. The whispered words at the party, "You're the servant's kid," stung worse than any financial struggle or sleepless night. It wasn't just about Tay, it was about years of being unseen, unappreciated, and undervalued. Every long day, every sacrifice, every quiet tear seemed to flash before her eyes. She realized that this one moment at the party wasn't random. It was the culmination of a lifetime of subtle, persistent bias. And yet, even in that wave of anger and hurt, Zola felt a spark of determination. She had built Tay's world with her own hands, and she wasn't about to let anyone tear it down with cruel words. She tightened her grip on his hand, remembering every struggle they had overcome together. Each memory, each hardship, only strengthened her resolve. No amount of favoritism, gossip, or whispered insults could change the truth. She had given Tay a life full of love, courage, and dignity, and she would make sure he always knew it. Zola's heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Anger and shame swirled inside her, a storm she could barely contain. She looked around the glittering room and noticed her mother, Ngozi, standing nearby, perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She had expected her mother to say something, to defend Tay or at least glance her way, but Ngozi stayed silent, blending into the crowd as if nothing had happened. The guests, dressed in designer outfits and sparkling jewelry, continued to laugh, toast, and chatter, completely oblivious to the tension that had just cut through the air like a... Zola felt the urge to snap, to storm across the room and confront everyone, Amara, Mama Ifeoma, even her own mother, but something inside her paused. She knew that acting on impulse could make things worse for Tay, and she refused to let his first taste of humiliation define him. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down to Tay's level, holding his small hands in hers. He peeked up at her with wide, confused eyes, still trying to understand why people he barely knew would say something so mean about him. "Ignore them," Zola whispered softly, her voice steady despite the fire inside her. "You are more than their words. You are strong, you are smart, and you are loved." Tay clung to her hand, nodding slightly, and Zola felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that he trusted her, and heartbreak that the world was already teaching him harsh lessons about favoritism and cruelty. She wanted to tell him that life wouldn't always be fair, but also that he could rise above it, that his worth was never defined by anyone else's opinion. As she straightened up, her mind raced with strategies. She thought about the long game, how she could protect Tay, how she could make the family see the truth, and how she could turn this painful moment into a lesson in dignity and courage. Anger simmered in her chest, but she channeled it into focus. She refused to let this party, this whispered insult, or anyone in the room break her or her son's spirit. Zola glanced at her mother again, then back at the crowd. She realized that this was bigger than a single insult. It was a challenge, a test of her strength, and an opportunity to show Tay that courage didn't always mean yelling or fighting. It sometimes meant standing firm, choosing your battles wisely, and protecting the people you love with quiet, unshakable determination. In that glittering hall full of laughter and whispers, Zola's resolve solidified. She would fight this with patience, intelligence, and love, and she would make sure Tay never felt small because of anyone else's cruelty. After the party, Zola couldn't stop thinking about what Amara had said. It wasn't just a single cruel remark. It felt like part of a pattern, a hidden rule in her family that Tay had always been on the outside. Determined to understand the full picture, she began quietly investigating. She went through old letters and cards tucked away in drawers, scanning for notes from her grandmother to other family members. One by one, the evidence emerged. Words of praise and gifts showered on Chinita's children, while Tay's achievements were barely acknowledged, sometimes ignored entirely. The pattern was clear. She didn't stop there. Zola scrolled through social media, looking at posts celebrating certain grandchildren, luxury vacations, school awards, expensive gifts, and compared them to Tay's milestone. The difference was glaring. Even on casual family group chats, she noticed subtle comments from relatives, hints of favoritism disguised as jokes. Then she remembered a few conversations she had overheard in the past. Whispers from Amara about how she needed to follow Grandma's instructions and how certain children were more special than others. A sinking feeling hit Zola when she realized that Amara hadn't just spoken out of her own mind. She had been coached, trained even, to say hurtful things that reinforced family bias. Grief and anger welled up together. Zola felt a pang of sadness for Tay, knowing he had been on the receiving end of this unfairness for years without fully understanding it. She felt a quiet rage at the adults who had let it continue, at the messages of superiority passed down like a secret family code. But beneath the hurt, a spark of determination ignited. This wasn't just about one insult at a birthday party anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of favoritism and teaching her son that his worth was never conditional on someone else's approval. As she pieced everything together, Zola began thinking strategically. She realized that confronting the issue would require more than emotion. It needed evidence, careful planning, and allies. She started making notes, collecting messages, and documenting incidents quietly. Each discovery strengthened her resolve. She would not allow her son to feel small, invisible, or less loved because of arbitrary family bias. She wanted more than just an apology. She wanted real change, a family environment where every child could be celebrated for who they were, without fear of judgment or favoritism. Zola looked at Tay, sitting across the room and playing quietly, and felt a wave of love mixed with fierce protection. This was bigger than a single party, bigger than hurtful whispers. It was about fairness, dignity, and teaching her son to stand tall in the face of prejudice. And in that moment, she silently promised herself she would uncover the truth, confront the injustice, and make sure that no child in her family would ever be told they were less than anyone else. After spending hours thinking and replaying the party incident in her mind, Zola realized she couldn't do this alone. She needed support, someone who understood the family dynamics and could help her navigate the delicate situation without making it worse for Tay. The first person who came to mind was her cousin Ngozia, an aunt who had quietly endured similar disregard from Mama Ifioma in the past. Zola called her later that evening, her voice shaking slightly, and shared everything. The whispers, the laughter, the pattern of favoritism, and her growing concern for Tay's well-being. Ngozia listened carefully, nodding, and then spoke with a calm authority that Zola had always admired. "I've seen this for years," she said softly. "I've kept quiet, but you're right, it's not fair. We can't let it continue." Together, they began to strategize, speaking in hushed tones about how to challenge the family's discriminatory mindset without triggering unnecessary conflict. They talked about documenting past events, keeping a record of favoritism, and highlighting Tay's accomplishments. Ngozia suggested subtle ways to raise awareness during gathering, planting seeds in conversations that would encourage other relatives to see the truth for themselves. Zola also reached out to her best friend, Adebola, a lawyer and strong advocate for children's and family rights. Adebola had a sharp mind and a compassionate heart, someone who could guide Zola on both emotional and legal fronts. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, Adebola listened to Zola's story and immediately began outlining strategy. "We need to protect Tay both emotionally and legally," Adebola advised. It's not just about words. If this escalates, you want to make sure his rights are safeguarded and that you have evidence to support him. Adebola explained how subtle family bias could have long-term effects, and together they planned ways to respond if the situation worsened. With Ngozia and Adebola in her corner, Zola felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies who believed in fairness, respect, and justice. Their support didn't just give her strength, it gave her direction. She began to see a clear path, small, deliberate actions that could change the family dynamic, protect Tay, and gradually confront Mama Ifeoma's favoritism without causing an explosive fallout. Every discussion, every plan, and every shared memory strengthened Zola's resolve. She realized that change wouldn't come overnight, but with careful planning, patience, and support from those who truly cared, it could happen. And most importantly, Tay would witness it all, seeing his mother stand up calmly but firmly, learning that dignity, courage, and advocacy were not just words, but ways of living. Zola felt ready to take the next steps, armed with love, strategy, and a growing network of allies who would help her rewrite the story of their family. After planning with Ngozia and Adebola, Zola knew it was time to take action, but carefully. She didn't want a big confrontation just yet. Instead, she decided to start with small, quiet acts that would gradually change how the family saw Tay and, at the same time, reveal the unfair favoritism that had been ignored for years. At the next family gathering, Zola made sure Tay's achievements were mentioned. When relatives asked how he was doing in school, she spoke proudly about his excellent grades, his recent art exhibition at the local community center, and how he had won a writing competition. She shared these stories naturally, without bitterness, letting the facts speak for themselves. Some relatives raised their eyebrows, some whispered to each other, and a few even smiled at Tay, noticing him for the first time in a way that wasn't just a formality. Zola also started documenting incidents of favoritism carefully. She saved screenshots of social media posts that showed Chinita's children receiving praise and gifts, while Tay's milestones were ignored. She kept notes about events and conversations that highlighted the unfair treatment. It wasn't about proving a point to humiliate anyone. It was about creating a clear record to show the truth when the time came. She began sharing small, indirect messages on social media. Posts about child accomplishments, fairness, and the importance of recognizing every child's efforts went up quietly, never naming names, but carrying a message her family couldn't ignore. Friends and distant relatives started commenting, praising her approach, and slowly, whispers about Tay's accomplishments began spreading within the family circle. Even in casual conversations, Zola planted seeds. At tea or during small chats, she mentioned Tay's art classes, his volunteer work, and his leadership in school projects. Slowly, other cousins started paying attention, realizing they had overlooked his successes all along. The quiet pressure was building without any dramatic scenes or public shaming, and Zola felt satisfaction in seeing the first cracks appear in the wall of favoritism. Most importantly, Tay noticed it too. He began standing taller, speaking with more confidence, and sharing his achievements without hesitation. Zola saw that these small acts weren't just about recognition. They were shaping him into someone who knew his worth, someone who could face family bias without shrinking. Every smile, every nod, every whispered acknowledgement became a tiny victory. Zola felt her strategy working. Change didn't need shouting, it didn't need anger. With patience, consistency, and subtle courage, she was slowly turning the tide. The family was beginning to notice that Tay deserved respect, and for the first time, Zola felt the quiet power of resistance, a power that would soon lead to bigger, unavoidable change. The next family gathering was in a luxurious hall in Victoria Island, full of sparkling decorations, laughter, and the usual display of wealth and status. Zola arrived with Tay, her heart steady, her mind focused. She had rehearsed her words over and over, but now, standing among relatives who had long ignored Tay's achievements, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a party. It was about demanding recognition and respect for her son, and finally confronting the bias that had haunted them for years. When the moment felt right, Zola approached Mama Ifeoma and Amara directly. The room seemed to quiet as she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I want to say something important," she began, catching her grandmother's eye. "Tay is my son, and he deserves the same respect and recognition as anyone else in this family. He works hard in school, he excels in his art, and he gives his best in everything he does. It's time we acknowledge his efforts and stop treating him as if he is less than anyone else." There was a tense pause. Mama Ifeoma's expression didn't change at first, but Zola noticed a flicker of surprise, maybe even discomfort. Amara shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing that the words she had been coached to repeat were being called out in front of everyone. Some relatives quickly defended the grandmother, whispering about tradition, family hierarchy, or how things had always been done. Others, however, looked thoughtful, their eyes on Tay, on Zola, and on the truth she was presenting. Quietly, the atmosphere began to shift, cracks forming in the old walls of bias. Tay watched everything from a few steps behind his mother, his small hands clenching and unclenching. He saw Zola stand tall, speak clearly, and confront injustice without anger or humiliation. Only facts, pride, and love. Something clicked inside him. He realized that courage didn't have to be loud or aggressive. It could be firm, intelligent, and rooted in self-respect. He saw how dignity and resilience could influence others, how speaking the truth with calm confidence could begin to change hearts. Zola didn't shout, and she didn't make anyone feel attacked. She simply held her ground, shining a light on what had been ignored for years. By the end of the conversation, the air had changed. Some family members whispered to each other, reevaluating their assumptions. Amara, red-faced, no longer repeated her usual jabs. And Mama Ifeoma, though silent, seemed to understand that her favoritism had been noticed, challenged, and recorded in a way that couldn't be ignored. As Zola took Tay's hand and led him away, she felt a quiet victory. This was more than a single confrontation. It was a turning point. Tay looked up at her with wide eyes, and she smiled softly. In that moment, he had learned one of life's most important lessons: to stand tall, to defend what is right, and to let love, pride, and courage guide every step. Zola knew that this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning that neither of them would ever forget. After the confrontation in Victoria Island, Zola realized that words alone might not be enough. She wanted to make sure Tay's dignity was protected, not just emotionally, but legally as well. She reached out to Adebola, her friend and lawyer, to discuss inheritance rights and other family matters that could affect her son. Sitting in Adebola's office, Zola explained everything: the favoritism, the insults, and the long history of being undervalued. Adebola listened carefully and reassured her that there were ways to safeguard Tay's future without creating more conflict. They went through documents, previous gifts, and family records, making a plan that would ensure Tay had equal rights and protection under the law. At the same time, Zola wanted to shine a light on the emotional side of what had happened. She decided to create a video, sharing her story about family favoritism and its impact on children, but she made sure to anonymize all names. The video showed her perspective as a mother, the struggles she and Tay faced, and the subtle ways children can be hurt by bias within their own family. She included cultural details familiar to Nigerian audiences, highlighting both the pride and the pressure that can exist in extended family. Her voice was calm, honest, and full of emotion, speaking directly to parents, children, and anyone who had ever felt overlooked or undervalued. Once posted, the video quickly began to gain attention. People shared it across WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, commenting on how relatable the story was. Parents reached out to thank Zola for raising awareness, while some young viewers expressed relief in seeing someone stand up for a child's dignity. The discussion expanded beyond her own family, sparking conversations about privilege, favoritism, and how children's self-worth is often shaped or broken by family attitudes. Zola noticed how powerful even small, thoughtful actions could be. The combination of legal preparedness and public awareness gave her confidence. She wasn't just fighting for Tay in private, she was helping start a conversation that could prevent other children from experiencing the same pain. She also saw how her careful approach, respectful, factual, and culturally grounded, earned her credibility, even among those who might disagree with her personally. Through this process, Zola realized that protecting Tay meant more than correcting past wrong. It meant teaching him that fairness, justice, and courage could coexist with love and family bond. The legal steps gave her son security, while the video empowered both of them to feel proud of their truth. And as the video continued to circulate, Zola saw the ripple effect of standing up, not angrily but wisely, turning a painful personal experience into a broader message about dignity, equality, and resilience. After Zola's video went viral and her careful planning with Adebola and Ngozia started to show results, the atmosphere in the family began to shift. Mama Ifeoma, once untouchable in her authority, started feeling the pressure. Criticism came quietly at first, whispers from relatives, subtle comments at gathering, but it soon grew louder. Even some of her peers, people who had always admired her influence, began questioning the way she treated Tay compared to her other grandchildren. The power she had wielded for decades was beginning to crack under the weight of truth and evidence. Zola stayed calm throughout it all. She didn't lash out or shout. Instead, she presented facts, stories, and examples of past favoritism whenever the topic arose. During family discussions, she reminded everyone of Tay's achievements, his academic excellence, his artistic talents, and the love and care she had poured into raising him. Her approach was respectful but firm, and it slowly forced relatives to confront what they had ignored for years. No longer could anyone claim Tay was less than or sweep the issue under the rug. Chinedu and Amara, who had once enjoyed being on the favored side of Mama Ifeoma's attention, began to notice the consequences of their words and actions. At first, it was awkward, mumbled apologies, stolen glances, and hesitation in conversation. But over time, they started acknowledging the hurt they had caused. Amara's teasing, which had seemed harmless to her before, was finally understood for what it was: damaging and unfair. Chinedu, too, had to come to terms with his complicity in the family bias. Slowly, the family began to see that recognition and respect for Tay weren't optional, they were necessary. Zola used these moments to set clear boundaries. She made it known, gently but firmly, that Tay's place in the family was secure and non-negotiable. He was no longer just the quiet child in the corner, ignored or dismissed. He had a voice, a presence, and a right to be treated with fairness. Any attempts to undermine him were met with calm reminders from Zola that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Tay observed all of this, learning from his mother's example. He saw how courage combined with patience and strategy could create real change. He understood that respect had to be earned and defended, and that sometimes standing up didn't mean being loud or aggressive. It meant being consistent, truthful, and unshakable in your values. By the end of this reckoning, the family was no longer the same. Mama Ifeoma had to reckon with her actions, Chinedu and Amara had begun acknowledging their mistakes, and Tay was finally recognized as a valued member of the family. Zola felt a quiet pride, knowing that the long struggle for fairness, dignity, and love was starting to bear fruit. The foundations were set, not just for Tay's future, but for a family culture that could slowly move toward justice and respect. After months of quiet persistence, small victories, and careful confrontation, Zola finally felt a shift in the family. Tay was no longer the overlooked child. Relatives acknowledged his achievements, asked about his school projects, and celebrated his talents. For the first time, Zola and Tay felt a real sense of belonging, an acceptance built on respect, not favoritism. The years of struggle, the whispered insults, and the careful planning had led to a moment where Tay could shine confidently in his own right. Meanwhile, Zola's viral video continued to make waves across social media. People from all over Nigeria, and even beyond, shared her story, resonating with her message about family favoritism, child dignity, and generational bias. Parents thanked her for raising awareness, while young people felt seen and inspired to stand up for themselves. The attention positioned Zola as a voice for fairness and justice within families, someone who could speak with authenticity, compassion, and courage. She realized that her personal struggle had become a platform for change, touching lives she had never met. Motivated by the impact, Zola took her mission a step further. She started a small nonprofit focused on children who are marginalized or overlooked within their own family. Through mentorship programs, community workshops, and advocacy campaigns, she aimed to teach children their worth, provide support for parents, and encourage families to foster equality and respect. What had begun as a personal fight for Tay's dignity had grown into a movement that could change lives. One afternoon, Zola and Tay sat together in a sunlit Lagos park, laughing freely as they watched children play around them. The city hummed softly in the background, but for them, it felt like a world of calm and hope. In that moment, Zola saw the full circle of their journey. Resilience had turned into joy, courage had created respect, and pain had transformed into purpose. Together, they had reclaimed their story, their legacy, and their future.